I plan events for a living. Weddings for 400 guests, corporate galas where one wrong centerpiece can end a vendor relationship, fundraisers where the seating chart matters more than the speeches. I know exactly how a banquet bill is built, line by line, before the first plate ever leaves the kitchen. So when my mother called after 2.5 years of silence and asked me to dinner to put the past behind us, there was one question I should have asked before I said yes. Whose name is on the reservation? I didn't ask it. I drove 50 minutes across the county to a place called the Aldridge, walked in wearing the only nice blazer I own, and found 14 people from my family already seated at a long table buried under lobster tails, tomahawk steaks, and a wine list someone had clearly worked through before I arrived. My father sat at the head of it like he'd built the room himself. He looked up, raised his glass, and said the sentence I had spent 34 years being trained to answer. "You're covering this, right? After everything, you owe us that much." He thought he had me. He'd done the math. 14 witnesses, a $4,000 table, and a daughter who had never once made a scene in a public room. What he didn't know was that I'd already spoken 9 quiet words to the woman managing the floor, and that in about 20 minutes, his own credit card was going to say the thing out loud that he'd spent 2 years pretending wasn't true. Welcome to Burn Bridges Club, where the people who lit the match are the ones who end up feeling the heat. If you've ever been the one expected to fix it, fund it, and stay quiet about it, pull up a chair. This one is for you. Hit subscribe and stay with me, because the way this dinner ends is not the way anyone at that table planned. But let me back up. Before the parking lot full of cars I recognized, before the wine that was already breathing when I walked in, I have to tell you who I was the morning that text arrived. Because that version of me was the one they were counting on, and she'd already stopped existing. My name is Camille. I'm 34. I produce events for a company in Columbus that handles the kind of functions where the budget has a comma in it, and sometimes 2. I started at 18 carrying trays of rubber chicken at a hotel banquet hall, smelling like sterno and other people's celebrations, riding the late bus home with my feet screaming. I learned the business from the floor up. Server, then captain, then coordinator, then producer. By 30, I had my name on contracts that decided whether a ballroom got booked. I'm not wealthy. I want to be clear about that, because my family built an entire evening on the assumption that I was. I rent a 1-bedroom with a radiator that clanks like a haunted house. I drive a Corolla with 140,000 miles on it. My one real luxury is that I take a full hour for lunch and I don't apologize for it. When I eat out, I order the same thing every time. The soup of the day and a glass of water. My coworkers think it's a bit. It isn't. When you grow up being the person who picks up everyone else's check, you learn to keep your own order small enough that you can always stand up and walk away from it. That morning, I was at my desk going over a load-in schedule for a medical conference, the kind of unglamorous Tuesday that makes you forget other people's lives, don't run on timelines and floor plans. My phone lit up. I glanced at it and something cold settled in the bottom of my stomach before my brain even caught up. It was a notification from a group chat I'd been removed from the day I became the family disappointment. Sylvia Hartley added you to the conversation. The chat was called Hartley Family, with a little sunflower my mother had picked years ago, back when the thread was for Thanksgiving menus and photos of my niece losing teeth. I hadn't seen that sunflower in 2.5 years. The history above my mother's newest message was blank, scrubbed clean, which told me one of 2 things. Either they'd wiped it before adding me back, or there'd been a second chat the whole time, one I was never in, where the real conversations happened. My mother's message was warm in that careful way she has, the way that always made me feel like I was reading something she'd practiced. Camille, sweetheart, your father and I have been doing a lot of thinking. We'd love for you to join us for dinner Saturday at the Aldridge so we can start fresh as a family. Just us. We miss you. Then, 30 seconds later, a second message. Family shows up for family. It's time we all remembered that. I read it twice. Family shows up for family. She'd said that to me when I was 19 and she needed my tip money to keep the electric on. She'd said it at 22 when my father wanted me to take over the lease on a vehicle he'd stopped being able to afford. She'd said it the night my brother's apartment deal collapsed, and I quietly wired the deposit so nobody had to know. In my house, family shows up for family had only ever meant one thing. Camille shows up, Camille pays, everyone else shows up to watch. I noticed she hadn't apologized. She hadn't said they'd been wrong or that cutting me off for 2.5 years was a mistake. She'd said it was time to start fresh, which is the kind of sentence that puts the burden of moving on entirely on the person who got hurt. No subject, no responsibility, no name attached to the thing that needed forgiving. I typed back, "I'll be there." Then I set my phone face down and went back to the load-in schedule, pretending my hands were steady. To understand why 2.5 years of silence happened, you have to understand my brother Drew. Drew is 29 and he has always believed that the only thing standing between him and success is a little startup capital. He's been a personal trainer, briefly. He sold supplements out of his trunk. He once tried to flip sneakers and ended up with 40 pairs of size 11 nobody wanted in a market that had already moved on. None of it was ever his fault. The market was wrong, the timing was bad, the partner flaked. 2.5 years ago, Drew found his dream. A boxing fitness franchise was expanding into the suburbs and selling territory licenses. He came home from a discovery weekend, lit up like a kid who'd seen the ocean for the first time. The buy-in was $90,000. He had $11,000. The franchisor would finance the rest, but the loan needed a guarantor with steady income and clean credit. That guarantor was supposed to be me. My mother called on a Sunday afternoon. My father was sitting beside her. I could tell from the silence behind her voice, the way he breathes when he's angry before anyone said anything. Drew needed the loan. The gym was his future. I had a real job and a real credit score and a history of saying yes. Just sign, Camille. Be a sister. I asked to see the franchise disclosure document first. I asked about the territory's population, the membership math, the failure rate of new locations, the part of the agreement where the franchisor can pull your license and keep your money. I asked because I have spent 15 years watching people pour their savings into a beautiful idea with no floor under it, and I know what $90,000 of someone else's debt feels like at 3 a.m. when the lights are off and the loan is still breathing. Drew didn't have the disclosure document. He had a brochure. My mother's voice went flat the way it does right before she stops pretending to be kind. "He's your brother. You don't read a contract to love your brother." I said no. My father stood up. I heard the chair scrape through the phone. He took it from her and said the sentence that ended things. "If you won't stand behind your own blood, then you're not really part of this family." I drove home. By the next morning, I'd been removed from the group chat. Nobody called. Nobody texted to explain. For 2.5 years, in the story they told at every holiday I wasn't invited to, I was the daughter who chose her credit score over her brother's dream. Here's the part I'm not proud of. The silence nearly broke me. Not because I thought they were right. I knew they weren't. It broke me because for the first time in my adult life, nobody needed me, and I didn't know who I was without that. It took me almost 2 years and a therapist named Dr. Asante to put a name to it. I had been the family's safety net since I was 18. First real paycheck went to the gas bill. First tax refund went to fix my mother's car. When my father's dealership had a slow quarter, I covered the family Christmas and told everyone I'd gotten a bonus, because I knew he'd never accept a dime from his daughter if he understood it was charity. When Drew got married the first time, I paid for the photographer and the cake and stood there smiling while my mother gave a toast about how she raised her children to take care of each other. I taught them. That's the truth I had to sit with in Dr. Asante's office. I taught my family that asking me was the same as receiving. I made myself so reliable that nobody ever had to wonder, and somewhere along the way, Camille will handle it, stopped being a kindness I offered, and became a fact they planned around. When I finally said no, they didn't try to understand it. They just unplugged the machine that wasn't dispensing anymore and walked away. So when my mother's message landed after all that silence, I felt the old reflex twitch in my chest, like a muscle you forgot you had. Go fix it. Pay whatever it costs. Make the family whole again. But under that, I heard Dr. Asante, calm as a held note. You taught them you would always catch them. That's the thing you have to unteach, not by catching them better, by stopping. My coworker Priya told me not to go. We were eating lunch at our desks the day after the invitation, and I made the mistake of telling her. She put her fork down and looked at me like I'd announced I was going to walk across a frozen lake I knew was thin. "Camille," she said, "this has setup written all over it. People who cut you off for 2 years don't suddenly want a fresh start. They want something." She'd never met my family, and she could see it more clearly than I could. I went anyway. Not because I believed there'd be an apology. I didn't. I went because I wanted to sit across a table from my parents one time and find out whether 2.5 years had changed anything, or whether the silence had just been a longer version of the same conversation we'd always had. The one where I listen, I agree, and I pay. I wanted an answer, even if the answer was that the door was nailed shut and I could finally stop standing in front of it. And there was something else, something I'll admit because some of you already know exactly what I mean. I miss my mother, not the woman who keeps score, not the project manager who can stage a reconciliation like she's staging an open house. I miss the mother who taught me to fold dumplings at the kitchen counter when I was 10, who hummed the same 3 songs every Sunday while she cooked, who once stayed up until 2 in the morning sewing a costume I needed for a school play I'd forgotten to mention. That woman hadn't called in 2.5 years either, but some nights I still heard those Sunday songs, and I wanted to believe she was still in there somewhere. So I made one rule and I wrote it on a sticky note. 1 dinner, no money, leave if it turns. I pressed it to the dashboard of my Corolla the morning of the dinner, and it was still there when I pulled into the Aldridge's lot and started counting the cars. I dressed plainly on purpose, dark slacks, a charcoal blazer I wear to client walkthroughs, flat shoes, no jewelry except a thin watch I bought myself the year I got promoted to producer, not to impress anyone. My family already believed I floated through life on a cushion of money, and nothing I wore was going to change that story. The truth was, I'd packed my lunch every day that week, and the watch had been on sale. The Aldridge sat at the end of a renovated row of shops on the side of town where the parking lots have landscaping and the host stand has a tablet instead of a book. I'd actually done a corporate dinner there once, years back, so I knew the room. I knew it sat about 140, that the private alcove in the back held a table for 16, and that the Lobster on their menu ran north of $70 a tail. I saw my father's truck in the second row. Same truck as 3 years ago, same dent in the tailgate he'd never bothered to fix. My mother's sedan beside it. Fine. Then I saw my Aunt Pam's minivan, my Uncle Wayne's pickup, my cousin Kayla's little hatchback, Drew's leased SUV, the one he could not possibly afford. 2 cars I didn't recognize at all. Just us, my mother had written. I counted 9 vehicles. I sat in the car for 2 full minutes with the engine off, reading the sticky note. The smart move was to reverse out of that lot, drive the 50 minutes home, eat the leftover stew in my fridge, and never think about a family reunion I hadn't been told I was the guest of honor at, or the patsy at. I still wasn't sure which. But I got out. I straightened my blazer, I locked the car, and I walked toward the doors because I was 34 years old and I had spent 2.5 years learning not to run, and I was not going to start again in a restaurant parking lot on a Saturday night. The doors were heavy glass with long brass pulls, the kind that whisper that the appetizers start at $20. Inside, the lobby smelled like seared butter and warm bread and the particular hush of a room where everyone's pretending money is no object. A host in a black dress checked the tablet and smiled. Hartley? I nodded. She nodded back, with the specific, tight expression of someone who has been managing a large, loud party for the better part of an hour and is holding it together. I knew that expression. I'd worn it 1,000 times. Your party's in the back. I'll walk you over. She grabbed a single menu. I noticed that. 1 menu, for the person arriving an hour late. The others had been seated long enough to have already decided. I heard them before I saw them. The laughter, the clink of glasses, my Aunt Pam's laugh cutting over everything else, a sound that could strip paint. We turned the corner into the alcove, and there it was. A long table, 16 chairs, 14 of them filled, 2 empty. 1 empty chair was at the far end. The other was directly across the table from my father, who sat at the head of it like he was about to gavel something into session. White linen, heavy silver, low candles and glass, and the food. Lobster tails fanned across crushed ice on a tiered tray. 2 tomahawk steaks the size of dinner plates, already carved into. A seafood tower with the top level demolished. And in the center, 2 bottles of wine I recognized from a vendor tasting. A Napa Cabernet that runs around $190 a bottle on a restaurant list, one of them empty, the other nearly so. They'd been here a while. They'd been ordering like the bill was somebody else's problem, which of course was the entire point. My mother saw me first. She stood with both arms wide and every head turned. "Camille, oh honey, look at you." And then they clapped. They actually clapped. Like I was a soldier coming home and not the daughter they'd ghosted for 900 days. My Uncle Wayne whistled. My Aunt Pam pressed a napkin to her eyes. Drew lifted his glass and gave me a smile with all teeth and no warmth in it. 14 people, a seafood tower, and 2 empty wine bottles, just us. I sat down. What else do you do when 14 people are watching and the chair is already pulled out and a server is filling your water glass before your bag hits the floor? I sat, and I smiled, because 15 years in hospitality gives you exactly one superpower. You can smile while the back of your mind runs a full threat assessment. "We wanted to surprise you," my mother said, settling back in, glowing. "The whole family, all together, like the old days." "You said it would just be the 4 of us," I said. She waved her hand like she was clearing smoke. "Well, once Pam heard, and then Wayne, and then the cousins wanted to come. You know how it grows. You can't tell family no." I knew exactly how it grows. I scanned the table the way I scan a room before doors open. My father at the head, working on a steak. Drew to his left, phone in one hand, wine in the other, only half present. Aunt Pam and Uncle Wayne anchoring the middle. My sister Haley and her husband Brett. My cousins Kayla and Trevor. 2 in-laws I'd met once at a wedding. And a woman at the end I had never seen before in my life, eating a lobster tail with the contentment of someone who had wandered into the right party. The wine was flowing. The platters were wreckage. They'd been here long enough to order most of the left side of the menu, and from the look of the table, they'd ordered the expensive half twice. My mother reached over and squeezed my hand. "See, family shows up for family." There it was again. The same 5 words, the same warm wrapping, the same target. I squeezed back and said nothing. I was counting plates. My father is a man who orders for the table, not asks. Orders. He flagged down our server, a kid who looked about 19 and like he was running on energy drinks and prayer, and rattled off additions without glancing at a menu. 2 more of the lobster, another round of the oysters, and bring us another bottle of the cab. The good one. The good one. Loud enough for the next 2 tables to hear it. Then he pulled his credit card out of his wallet and held it up between 2 fingers, the way a magician shows a coin before he makes it vanish. "Put it all on this," he told the server. "We're celebrating tonight." The server, his name tag said Eli, scribbled, nodded, and headed for the kitchen looking like a man who badly needed 5 minutes alone in the walk-in. I watched my father slide the card back into his wallet and pat the leather flap, the way you pat a dog that did its trick on command. And something didn't fit. I grew up watching this man argue with a cashier over 40 cents. I once saw him drive across town to return a drill because the one closer to home was $2 more. Roger Hartley did not order a second $190 bottle of wine. He did not flash his credit card like a flag. This was a performance, and it was aimed straight at me. "Look how well we're doing, Camille. Look how little we ever needed you." Except the truck in the lot still had the same dent, and my mother's purse, sitting on the chair beside her, was the same one she'd carried for a decade, the strap repaired with a paperclip and a prayer. And a man who has money does not have to announce it twice in 15 minutes. They were performing. I just didn't know the cover charge yet. The little cut started around the time the 3rd bottle arrived. Aunt Pam leaned across the table and said, "Must be nice, living the high life with your fancy job while the rest of us are clipping coupons." She laughed when she said it, the way people laugh when they want you to know they mean it. My cousin Trevor, who I hadn't spoken to since a backyard barbecue years ago, asked if I ever felt bad doing so well while my parents were going through a rough patch. I didn't know about a rough patch. Nobody had told me about a rough patch. That was the first crack of light through a door I'd assumed was closed. Drew, not even looking up from his phone, added, "She wouldn't know. She doesn't come around." Each comment landed too cleanly to be improvised. Not a script exactly, but the way a choir finds the same note without anyone counting them in. They'd talked about me, about my money, my absence, what I owed. They'd arrived tonight with a shared version of the story already agreed on. Camille left. Camille has plenty. Camille is the reason this family is short. Aunt Pam delivered the thesis. She reached over, took my hand like she was comforting me at a funeral, and said, "We don't keep score in this family, sweetheart." I almost laughed. This from the woman who hadn't spoken to her own sister for a year over a borrowed casserole dish. I didn't laugh. I slid my hand back gently and picked up my water glass. I had ordered the soup of the day and a glass of water. That was it. 14 people drowning in lobster and Cabernet, and me with a bowl of butternut squash soup and a tumbler of tap, sitting at the end of the table like the designated driver at a bachelor party. The contrast was almost funny. It would have been funny if I hadn't been able to feel exactly where the evening was headed. Eli, the server, passed behind me and refilled my water without being asked. When he set the glass down, he caught me watching the table with an expression I clearly hadn't hidden well enough. "Long night?" he said quietly, just to me. I almost told him the truth. Instead I said, "You're holding it together really well considering." He blinked, surprised, like he'd forgotten a customer could say a kind thing to him. Then he stood up about half an inch straighter and moved on to refill my uncle's glass. Let me tell you about Eli because Eli matters. He was maybe 19, built thin the way restaurant kids are before they learn to eat standing up between rushes. He moved fast and careful, the way new servers move when the table is too big and the order is too complicated, and they know one wrong plate means a conversation with a manager they can't afford to have. He was running a 14 top mostly on his own, with a busser appearing now and then to clear. Every refill, every, "Excuse me, can we get more bread?" Every demand from my aunt who'd asked for the same thing 3 times. He never sighed. He never made it about himself. I recognized everything about him, because I had been him. 18 years old, 2 tables deep, learning that the people who snap their fingers are always the ones who leave the worst tip. I watched him go and thought about the girl I used to be, the one who cried in the linen closet on the bad nights and had no idea she'd end up on the other side of a table like this one, being asked, without being asked, to write one more check to a family that only ever called when something needed paying for. That girl would have paid tonight. She'd have pulled out her card before anyone finished the sentence. I wasn't her anymore. I excused myself around the 40-minute mark. I told them I needed to make a quick work call, which wasn't true, but I needed a corner where my Aunt Pam's voice couldn't reach me, and a minute to let my heart rate come back down from whatever altitude it had climbed to. I stepped out of the alcove and toward the front of the restaurant, near the host's stand, where it was quieter. And I would have kept going to the restroom and splashed water on my wrists and gone back in, except for what I heard on the way. My Aunt Pam and Uncle Wayne had stepped out too, near the coat closet, and they had their backs to me. Pam doesn't know how to lower her voice. She was holding a glass of wine and saying, "Sylvia says the minute Camille's sitting there with everyone watching, she's not going to make a scene. She'll cover it, like she always does. She just has to get them through till the lot sells." Wayne grunted. "And if she doesn't?" "She will," Pam said like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "When has Camille ever not?" Then she laughed and they went back in. I stood there by the coat closet with my heart doing something very slow and very clear, not racing, settling. The way a room goes quiet right before a big event starts, when every station is set and every plate is plated and there's nothing left to do but open the doors. Get them through till the lot sells. The lot, the dealership, Hartley Auto, the performance with the wine and the card, the steaks, the seafood tower, the second good bottle. It wasn't celebration. It was a stage set, and the climax of the show was a daughter quietly handing over her card so a family that was underwater could keep pretending they were standing on dry land. And so my father could sit at the head of that table in front of his brother and his neighbors, and never have to say the one sentence he couldn't survive saying out loud. "We're broke." I walked to the host stand. There was a woman there in a blazer with an earpiece, reviewing something on the tablet. The unmistakable posture of the person actually running the floor. Her name tag said Renata. I'd guess she'd been doing this for 20 years. I waited until she looked up, and I spoke in the register you use in this industry, when you're handling something that does not need an audience. Calm, low, professional. "Hi, I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Camille Hartley. I'm with the party in the back alcove. Can I ask you a quick question about how the table's set up?" Renata's posture shifted immediately, the way one industry person clocks another. "Of course." Is the group on a single tab, and is there a host of record on file? She tapped the tablet, scanned it, and here's where the floor dropped out from under the whole evening. Yes, it's on one check. The reservation was placed under your name, actually. Camille Hartley. We have it noted that you're the host and the responsible party, and there's a deposit card on file that was authorized when the booking was made. I kept my face exactly where it was. Who placed the reservation? She checked. It came in by phone about 10 days ago. The contact name on the booking is Sylvia Hartley, but the host of record and billing contact is listed as you. The caller said the dinner was a surprise for the daughter and that the daughter would be settling the group tab. I let that sit for 1 second. 10 days ago. My mother had called this restaurant 10 days before she ever texted me, and she'd told them that the surprise was for me and that the surprise would be paying. She'd put my name on the responsibility line of a $4,000 dinner I hadn't even been invited to yet. And the deposit card, I said. Is that in my name? Renata checked again. No, the deposit is on a card under Roger Hartley. We just have you down as the person settling the final bill. Of course. They'd needed a card to hold the table, and they'd used his, because they had to. But the plan, the part they'd told the restaurant, was that the daughter would pay the final number. That's how confident they were. They'd put it in writing to strangers before they'd even asked me. I looked at Renata, and I made a decision in the time it takes to set down a fork. I need to correct the file, I said. I'm not the host of this party. I didn't place the reservation, I didn't authorize a deposit, and I'm not the responsible party for this table. Please remove me as the billing contact entirely. To her credit, she didn't blink. Done. Should I update the host of record to the card holder, Mr. Hartley? Since his card is the one securing the reservation, the final check defaults to him as the responsible party unless someone else presents payment. Yes, I said. Update it to him. The full table check goes to Roger Hartley. She tapped it in. One more thing. This is the part I want you to hear because it's the part I'm proudest of. I had the soup of the day in water. Split that onto a separate check, just mine, and add 30% to it for the server. His name's Eli. He's been running that whole table by himself, and he's been doing it right. Renata looked at me for a moment, the way a good floor manager reads a situation in one pass, fast and complete and without judgment. Then something in her expression warmed, just slightly. I'll take care of it personally, she said. Give me a few minutes and I'll bring out the checks once the table's done with dessert. I paid for my soup right there at the stand. A bowl of soup, a glass of water, and a tip that I would later learn was the largest single tip Eli had gotten in 2 months. Renata ran my card, handed me the receipt, and folded it into a little leather presenter for me to keep. You good? She asked quietly. I'm good, I said. And for the first time all night it was true. I walked back to the table, sat down, picked up my water, and took a slow sip. Drew was arguing with Trevor about a football game. Aunt Pam was telling Haley about a feud with her neighbor over a fence. My mother was watching me with the soft, satisfied attention of a woman who believed the check had been handled. My father was leaning back, arms crossed, a king at his own table. 14 people finishing a $4,000 meal, waiting for a bill they had no intention of looking at. I set my glass down and waited with them. Those next minutes were the most peaceful of my entire night. The table didn't know it, but the dinner was already over in every way that counted. The food was eaten, the wine was gone, the ask was about to be made, and the answer had already been given in a language none of them spoke. I sat at my end, and I listened to my family the way you listen to a song you used to love and finally outgrew. Aunt Pam complained about the price of mulch. Uncle Wayne told a fishing story with no ending. Drew took a photo of his empty plate for reasons I'll never understand. My mother laughed at something, and for about 3 seconds her laugh sounded exactly like the woman who used to hum on Sunday mornings, and something in my chest pulled toward her before I caught it. Then I looked at my father, checking his phone under the table with the tight-jawed focus of a man waiting on a text he was dreading. And I heard my aunt's voice again. Get them through till the lot sells. And whatever had pulled toward my mother let go. The dessert menus came. Aunt Pam ordered the creme brulee without glancing at the price. Haley ordered a chocolate souffle, which takes 20 minutes, which meant she'd ordered it before I'd even sat down. They were running up the tab the way you run up a tab when it isn't yours. No ceiling, no guilt, no glance at the right-hand column. My water was down to ice. My father waited until dessert. I'll give him that. He's strategic. The soufflé had landed, the brulee had been cracked, the last of the Cabernet was poured, and the table was warm and slow and full in that way that makes people generous with other people's money. He set down his fork. He folded his hands on the edge of the table, the same way he folds them before he signs something, before he gives a toast, before he asks you for a favor. He's decided is a foregone conclusion. He looked at me, not cruelly, with the calm certainty of a man who believes he is being perfectly reasonable. "So, Camille," he smiled, "you're covering this, right? After everything, you owe us that much." The table went quiet in a hurry. Eli, refilling a water 2 seats down, went still. The couple at the next table stopped pretending not to listen. "You owe us that much. You owe us 2.5 years of silence. You owe us a dinner you weren't told about, in a restaurant you didn't choose, surrounded by people you weren't invited to see. And not one person at that table had said they were sorry. Not one had said they were wrong, or that they'd missed me for any reason that wasn't attached to my bank account." My mother nodded along, gentle and encouraging, like he'd asked me to pass the salt. Drew smirked into his wine. Aunt Pam reached for another roll like the matter was settled. And I felt something I genuinely did not expect. Relief. Because the decision I'd been afraid to make all night had just been made for me, out loud, in front of everyone, by the man who'd cut me off for refusing to fund his son. I didn't have to start a fight. He'd handed me the ending. I didn't answer right away. I've learned that silence does more work than words in a room full of people who are used to being agreed with. 3 seconds, 5. Long enough that people started reaching for their glasses and finding things to look at on the walls. For 15 years, I had paid so that no one would ever make a scene. I picked up every check, co-signed every favor, covered every deposit and every emergency, because the price of saying no in my family was a room exactly like this one. Staring faces. The unspoken understanding that Camille's love came in dollars, and Camille's silence could be bought with a swipe of a card. 15 years. And the cost of admission to my own family had just been read aloud, somewhere north of $4,000, plus wine, plus the particular tax of being the child they only called when something needed funding. I looked at my father's folded hands. I looked at my mother's warm, performing eyes. I looked at Drew, already back on his phone because as far as he was concerned, this was over. I looked at Eli by the service station, watching with the careful attention of a kid who knows something is happening but isn't sure what. And I looked at my glass of water, catching the candlelight, the smallest, cheapest thing on a table built to bury me. I put my napkin down. I smiled. "Let me go take care of it," I said, and I stood up. My mother exhaled. Aunt Pam patted her chest. My father unfolded his hands and leaned back, satisfied. Every single one of them thought I was going to pay. 15 years behind a host stand teaches you one thing above all others. The person who controls the check controls the room. My family thought they controlled it. They'd chosen the restaurant, set the table, ordered the menu, gathered the audience, and delivered the demand. They had 14 people and a planned ambush on their side. I had 9 words already spoken and a manager named Renata. If a quiet boundary has ever changed your whole life, if you've ever stood up in a room where everyone expected you to fold, hit subscribe right now because you're going to want to see how this lands. I did not walk toward the front. I walked toward the service station along the back wall, where Renata was already waiting, 2 leather check presenters in her hand. She'd been watching the table. She knew. "Are we set?" I asked, low. "We're set," she said. "Full table check to Mr. Hartley. Your soup and gratuity are already settled on yours. I'll present them now." "Perfect." I walked back to the table, sat down, picked up my water, and took another slow sip. And I waited with all of them for the bill that was about to walk up to the wrong end of the table. Renata came out a moment later carrying a single leather presenter, embossed with the Aldridge's logo, and she set it down directly in front of my father, not the center of the table, not near me. In front of Roger Hartley, the man who'd made the reservation, whose card was holding it, who'd told the server 2 hours ago to put it all on his. The conversation died like a candle in a draft. My father stared at the leather folio. I could watch him do the math. The check was supposed to go to Camille. The check was supposed to go to Camille. The check is in front of me. My mother's eyes went wide. She looked at me, at the folio, back at me, and for the first time all night her composure cracked just enough to show the gears grinding behind it. "Camille," she started. "My father recovered first. He's always been good at recovering, a man who has spent 60-some years refusing to admit he was ever caught off guard. He picked up the folio, flipped it open with a careless flick, and did not look at the number. He couldn't. If he looked at the number in front of 14 people, the whole performance would collapse on the spot. "I've got it," he said, sliding his card out with the same two-finger flourish from earlier. He handed it to Renata without breaking eye contact with me. "We're celebrating, remember?" "Of course, sir," Renata said. "One moment." She walked it to the terminal at the service station. I watched her run it. I watched her run it again. I watched her come back. She leaned down beside my father's chair and said, at a volume meant to be private, but landing in a room that had gone quiet enough to hear ice settle, "I'm sorry, sir. The card was declined." Nobody moved. My father's smile held one more second, a reflex, a light that stays on a beat after you flip the switch. "Run it again," he said. "I ran it twice, sir." "Then there's a different card." He pulled out his wallet and went through it, one slot, then the next, then a third card from behind his license, the way you reach for the last round in a chamber you'd forgotten you'd emptied. He handed it over. Renata took it. She ran it. She came back. She didn't have to say anything. Her face said it. My father looked at her. Then he looked at me, and there it was, the thing the whole evening had been built to hide. Not anger, not yet. The raw, unguarded face of a man who has just understood, in front of every single person whose opinion he cares about, that the safety net he'd been counting on was gone, and the ground was exactly as far down and exactly as hard as he'd always feared it was. He looked at me, the way you look at a lifeboat pulling away. I picked up my water, I took a sip, I set it down. "I'm not paying for this," I said. "I never agreed to, and I don't owe it." My father's chair scraped back hard against the floor. "Camille." His voice was low and controlled and shaking right at the edge. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything, Dad. Your card got declined. That's between you and your bank. You were supposed to—" He stopped himself, but a half-second too late. The sentence hung there in the candlelight, unfinished and perfectly clear to everyone. "You were supposed to pay." My mother started to cry, not the quiet kind, the other kind, with the gasps and the napkin and the volume engineered to recruit sympathy from the next 3 tables. "After everything I've done for you," she said, "after I raised you, how could you sit there and humiliate your father like this?" "What have you done for me, Mom?" My voice stayed level. I didn't lean in. I didn't raise it. "In the last 2.5 years, tell me, in front of everyone, what did you do for me?" She didn't have an answer, so she cried harder. Drew slapped his hand on the table. "This is so typical. You always have to make everything about you." Aunt Pam reached for my arm. "Camille, dear, your father's embarrassed. Can't you just—" "No." One word, said the way I'd say it to a vendor trying to short me on a contract. Clear, final, no apology attached. Pam's hand stopped halfway across the table. Then my father broke, and it was worse than the anger would have been. His voice dropped, and for one terrible, honest moment, he sounded like a man standing in a dark house with the power shut off. "Camille, please, we're going under. The dealership's gone. The house is next." And I saw him. I saw the scared man behind the performance, the father who'd lost the thing he'd built his whole identity around and couldn't say it out loud until a credit card said it for him. I saw him and it ached, a real ache, the kind I'd carried for this family my whole life. Then he said the next part. "And you were just going to let us drown." And the ache stopped. Because even now, even sinking, he wasn't reaching for my hand. He was reaching for my wallet. The wound wasn't that they were broke. The wound was that the only role they'd ever written for me was the one where I pay, and they'd rather go under blaming me than sit across the table and simply ask. I stood up, not fast, not for show, the way you stand when you've made your decision and you don't need the room's permission to leave. "Dad, I'm sorry you're struggling. I mean that. But this," and I gestured at the wreckage, the empty platters, the upside-down bottles, the 14 faces watching me like I was the villain in a story they'd rehearsed all week. "This isn't asking for help. This is a trap. You didn't invite me here to make peace. You invited me here to make a payment." "That's not fair," My mother sobbed. We just wanted you back. You wanted me back for what I could cover. I heard Pam in the lobby, Mom. Get them through till the lot sells. You put my name on the bill at this restaurant 10 days before you ever texted me. You told strangers I'd be paying before you told me I was invited. The table went white. My Aunt Pam's face drained. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. If you need real help, I said, I'll sit down with you and a financial counselor and we'll build an actual plan. No tricks, no audience, no lobster, but I'm not paying this bill. I didn't order it, I wasn't told about it, and I don't owe it to you. I never did. Nobody spoke. I picked up my bag. I looked at my mother one last time across that ruined table, and I said the last thing I'll ever say to her there. You always told me family shows up for family, so tell me, why was I always the only one who did? Then I walked out, past the busser, past the host stand, past the heavy glass doors with the brass handles. Eli caught me near the coat closet. He had my receipt in his hand and an expression I'll remember for a long time. Ma'am, he said, thank you, really. I touched his shoulder. You're going to be great at this, I told him. Don't let the snappers convince you otherwise. And I walked out into the night. The parking lot was quiet. A warm Saturday, crickets going in the landscape trees that made the Aldridge look like it belonged somewhere more important than the end of a renovated strip. I sat in my Corolla with the engine off and the window down and read the sticky note still pressed to my dashboard. One dinner, no money, leave if it turns. I'd done all 3. I pulled out my phone and opened the Hartley family chat. The messages were already pouring in. My mother, Aunt Pam, Drew, cousins I hadn't heard from in years, all of them typing at once, a flood of exclamation points and accusations, the very specific fury of people who got caught and want to relabel it as betrayal. I didn't read them. I scrolled to the bottom, tapped Leave Group, and watched the little gray line confirm it. Camille left the conversation. I set the phone on the passenger seat. I started the car, and I drove the 50 minutes home in the same silence I'd driven therein, except this time the silence wasn't nervous. It was mine. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. No one called that night, no one called the next day, or the day after that. The chat I'd left kept going without me, I assume, the way these things do. My cousin Kayla reached out separately about a week later. She'd been at the table, near the middle, and I'd barely registered her there. Her message was short. I should have said something at that dinner, and I didn't. What you did was the most honest thing that's happened in this family in years. I'm sorry I was part of it. Kayla was the only one who apologized. 3 weeks after that, Drew texted, not to apologize, to ask if I could float him first in last month's rent on a new place, because his lease was up and money was tight right now. I sent him the name and number of a financial counseling service and wished him well. He didn't write back. Through Kayla, over the following months, I learned the rest in pieces. The dealership had been in trouble for almost 2 years before that dinner. My father had borrowed against the lot, then against the house, then against the house again. My mother had been making minimum payments on 4 cards using money that didn't exist. The dealership went into receivership in the fall. The house sold short over the winter. My parents moved into a rental 2 towns over. Drew never opened a gym. None of it is what I wanted for them. I want to be honest about that, because I think some of you are sitting there wondering if I felt good. I didn't feel good. I felt clear, which is a very different thing. All of it was the consequence of choices they'd made for years before I ever walked into the Aldridge, and none of it was mine to fix. I kept my word. About 6 weeks after the dinner, I called my father and offered, again, to sit down with him and a counselor and build a real plan. He hung up on me. I haven't called since. But the offer still stands, and he knows it. I used to think love meant being the person who never let anyone hit the ground. I built my whole life on it. I was proud of it. And it took a $4,000 dinner and a declined credit card to teach me what I'd actually built. Some people will keep falling as long as they're sure you're underneath them. The kindest thing you can do, for them and for yourself, is to finally step aside and let them learn there's a floor. That's my story. 14 seats, 1 bowl of soup, and a credit card that finally said the thing nobody at that table had the courage to say. If you've ever been the family's safety net, hear me on this. Helping is something you choose. It is not a debt you were born owing. And a boundary doesn't have to be loud to hold. If this reached you tonight, you already know someone who needs to hear it. Send it to them. Leave a comment and tell me about the dinner you walked out of, or the one you wish you had. Subscribe to Burned Bridges Club, and I'll see you at the next table.